Hello and welcome back to REV Endurance Sports and another episode in the series of, hey, just got a power meter. What do all these numbers mean? So today we're going to combine a few other things that we've already talked about. Yesterday's video was on intensity factor, and that'll come into play in today's video. So we're going to talk about training stress score, and that is abbreviated as TSS. And it basically tells you how hard your workout was based on the duration of that workout. And all of that combined gives you a training stress score. So how hard, and then of course how long, right? So we can look at this formula here. And so your duration, or I should say your TSS, is equal to your duration and then your intensity factor, which we talked about yesterday. You're going to square that. And of course, your intensity factor compares how hard your workout was compared to your FTP, your functional threshold power. You multiply all that together and you get a training stress score. So let's put this in some perspective, okay? Because when you look at your TSS, I had a math teacher, I forgot, Mr. Hallman, and he used to say when you would look at the solution that you got out of your math problem, he called it sanitize your numbers. Does that number look like something that would come out of this equation? You know, is it sane, right? So the reason I'm bringing this up is I have a group thread with some folks going, and someone's TSS for 4.5 hours was over 600 and then over 700 for a different ride. So it kind of came to light that probably need to talk about TSS sooner rather than later. So a TSS of about 0 to 75, obviously 0 is no stress, is a low stress, active recovery ride or an easy day on the bike. TSS of 75 to 150, that's a moderate stress. It's typical of an endurance workout. And then a TSS of 150 to 300 and above is high stress. It's an intense session or a long race. And you know, this is cumulative fatigue, right? So, you know, anything over 300, there is another table that I'll find. There are days of recovery required from a TSS of a certain number and above, right? Now, in the future, we're going to talk about a couple of these other things. So TSS is really important because if your FTP is set correctly and you're starting to ride and you're starting to accumulate stress on your body, then you will start to see your acute training load, ATL, and your chronic training load. Basically, how much stress you're putting on your body, because you need to give it stress and then your body recovers from that stress. You adapt from that stress, and that is how you gain fitness. And maybe your FTP needs to change, right? So that's why it's important to track training stress score, because there is a chart that now your CTL, chronic, and let's just call it fatigue, right? So the amount of chronic fatigue is accumulating, and so is your acute is a shorter window, chronic is a longer window. I think it's 7 days for acute and 6 weeks for chronic. I'll look that up. And as you build certain stress, you then want to give yourself some recovery time so you can taper off for maybe an A event, triathlon, Grand Fondo, whatever that thing may be, your first century, whatever. All right, so let's circle back to FTP, right? So if you do 1 hour at your FTP, that is a 1 from our intensity factor that we covered yesterday. So now let's plug it into the formula. 1 hour times your 1.0 of IF, you square that, times 100 equals 100 TSS. You scored 100. 100. Awesome, right? Because you rode at your FTP for 1 hour, right? So in other words, if you look at a TSS score on your training...
It's 1 o'clock.
It's 1 o'clock. On your training rides, and you start to see 500, 600, 700 TSS, that's saying that you rode at your FTP for 6 hours to accumulate a 600 TSS score, right? But the ride was only 4.5 hours. So your FTP is set too low and you're accumulating a lot of stress mathematically, but that's not the reality because the FTP is in the, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you've got the wrong FTP number, then your calculations will be wrong. So in a nutshell, you track your TSS because it tells you your acute training load, your chronic training load. You track it so you can plan your training workouts properly, give your body the stress that it needs so that it can adapt to that stress, but so you don't overtrain, right? And conversely, what I said earlier about if your TSS is 600, but you only did a 4.5 hour ride, it could be the other way around too. You could not be accumulating enough stress because your FTP is set too high, right? So if your FTP is set too high, you can't get to 100 TSS like ever, right? So, but anyway, the real important thing that I want you to take away from this is that your TSS being based off of your FTP and your intensity factor, that's how you know how long and how hard your ride was and how much stress is being put onto your body. And then also, how much recovery time are you going to need from that? So to keep this video short, we're going to wrap it up here. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about TSS because I think it's very, very important in a long-term view of your training, okay? And this is where Training Peaks really comes into play because you can actually see that. And what will happen is if you train, if you either you're self-coached or you hire me as your coach, you'll want to accumulate a lot of stress. And then there is a thing called training stress balance. And that is when you'll see your stress start to come down and your fitness start to come up. And that is where you want to do that A-list event for your season or whatever it is. Okay, that's all for today. Please like and subscribe. And if you're getting value out of these videos, please share them with a friend. Share them with your social media apps. And, again, I looked yesterday. It's like 67% of the people watching these Power Meter videos are not subscribed. So please subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything. And it means the world to me. We're over 9,000 subscribers. I'd like to get to 10. Okay, thank you so much. We'll see you up the road.